Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be looking at something that I think is very relevant to a lot of our listeners,
Mhm.
especially those of us who work.
Yeah.
We're going to be diving into a book called Neoliberalism as a Management of Suffering.
Okay.
And we're going to be talking about,
Sounds heavy.
it is a little heavy, we're going to be talking about how that ideology
Yeah.
sort of permeates into our understanding of mental health
Mm-hmm.
and our experience of the workplace and suffering in the workplace.
It's interesting how this book frames neoliberalism not just as like an economic system,
Right.
but like an ideology that shapes how we see and experience things like stress and anxiety.
It's like it defines our understanding of mental health.
Exactly. And so one of the things the book talks about is this idea
Sure,
that unlike classical liberalism,
Okay.
which saw suffering as like an obstacle to productivity and happiness,
Mm-hmm.
neoliberalism kind of sees it as something that can be exploited or even enjoyed.
Enjoyed.
Yeah.
How do you enjoy suffering?
Well, so think about like the pressure to constantly push boundaries at work,
Okay.
to hustle and maximize your output, even if it means like burning yourself out.
Right.
It's almost like suffering becomes this badge of honor,
Oh, wow.
this sign that you're dedicated.
Yeah. Have you ever felt that? Listener, I know I have.
And the book calls this the design of the neoliberal subject, which basically means that we internalize these values of performance and investment and self-improvement.
Oh, so it's like
It's like we're being programmed to think this way.
almost like brainwashed.
Yeah, you could say that.
And you see this everywhere, right?
Everywhere.
Personal branding, hustle culture, always be closing.
Mhm.
It's like these marketing principles have just invaded our entire identities. We're always striving to optimize ourselves.
Precisely. And that can take its toll.
Right.
I mean, you might feel inadequate or anxious
Mhm.
about not measuring up, or even like you're failing morally if you can't keep up with the demands.
It's like we're on this hamster wheel of self-improvement and productivity.
A very fast hamster wheel.
Yeah. And if you step off,
Yeah.
you're done. You're lazy, you're unambitious.
Right. And this kind of ties into another observation from the book, which is that we've seen this decline of neuroses
Okay.
and this rise of depression as like the dominant mental health concern.
Is it that we're actually more depressed? Or is it that we're just labeling things differently now?
Well, it's probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
But the book argues that this emphasis on individual responsibility under neoliberalism plays a big role
Okay.
because it creates this climate where we internalize our struggles as personal failures
Yeah.
rather than looking at systemic factors.
So instead of looking at the bigger picture like
Exact-
socioeconomic conditions or whatever,
Right.
we blame ourselves.
Right. And this is where the concept of interest, which is, central to liberal economic theory, gets really fascinating.
Okay, so how does that play in?
So in classic liberalism, interest was just about pursuing what benefits you. It was a neutral force in the economy. But neoliberalism kind of adds this moral layer to it, like not constantly striving for more, not maximizing your self-interest, is now seen as this failing.
So it's not just about like working hard.
Right.
It's about this moral obligation to be productive.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see how insidious this can get.
It is. It's very subtle. And it all circles back to that design we talked about, We're constantly told to invest in ourselves, optimize our potential, maximize output. And if you're not doing those things, you feel like you're failing.
You're not living up to your potential.
Exactly.
So is there more to this idea of suffering being exploited?
There is. The book talks about the rise of enhancement in psychiatry,
Okay.
where the focus is shifting from just treating mental illness to like boosting performance and well-being.
So it's not just about fixing what's wrong.
Right.
It's about
It's about optimizing.
optimizing. Okay, that sounds like a sci-fi film.
Right. But it does raise ethical concerns because the book suggests that this trend could lead to pressure from employers
Oh, wow.
for employees to utilize these enhancements to become more productive and resilient.
So like imagine being pushed to take a pill
Right.
to become like the ideal worker
Yes,
who
yes.
can handle any workload without complaint. That is chilling.
It is chilling.
And it feels like we're kind of already on the verge of that.
We might be closer than we think.
So I think what we're getting at here is that,
Yeah,
it's really important to understand these concepts,
absolutely.
to be aware of these trends and how they impact our mental health.
Because once you're aware of them,
Yeah.
you can start to resist them.
Does the book give any like real world examples of how this stuff plays out?
It does. And what makes it unique is that it focuses on Brazil as a case study.
Brazil.
Brazil. Well, Brazil provides a fascinating lens because of its complex social and economic realities. The book explores how these neoliberal ideas were adopted and adapted in a society that was already grappling with significant challenges.
So it's not like this one-size-fits-all approach to neoliberalism.
No.
It shows how these ideas are shaped by the specific cultures, societies they're implemented in. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about the shift from suffering as an obstacle to suffering as a resource.
Right.
The design of the neoliberal subject, the changing landscape of mental illness.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. The moralization of interest, but we're just getting started.
Yeah, we're just scratching the surface.
So stay tuned for part 2,
Yeah.
where we'll continue unpacking these ideas and dive deeper into the book's analysis of the Brazilian experience.
I can't wait. So, welcome back.
Okay, so before the break, we were talking about how this whole neoliberalism thing can make us feel like we need to exploit our own suffering to, like, get ahead.
Yeah, right. And you mentioned that Brazil had some unique challenges even before those new liberal policies came into play.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So Brazil has this long history of social and economic inequality,
Right.
which, already creates a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
But then when they introduce neoliberal policies with this focus on, you're on your own.
Like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah, exactly. These existing inequalities often just got worse.
So it's like, instead of addressing those underlying issues, they just told people to figure it out themselves.
Pretty much. And the book argues that this had a big impact on mental health in Brazil.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about it as those social safety nets weaken and public services got privatized.
Mm-hmm.
People were left to fend for themselves in this increasingly competitive and individualistic society.
So it was like a pressure cooker.
Yeah. And that pressure cooker environment definitely takes a toll on your mental health.
Absolutely. Did the book talk about, like, how this actually showed up in people's lives?
They did, yeah. One of the key insights was this shift in the types of mental health issues people were experiencing. Like before, anxiety and neuroses were more common.
Okay.
But then as these neoliberal policies took hold, there was this noticeable increase in depression.
So it's like the system itself was kind of making people feel hopeless.
Exactly. Like they were failing even when the odds were stacked against them.
And it's so easy to internalize that, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is how the book connects this back to the idea of suffering as a resource.
Okay, I'm curious about that. How does suffering become a resource in this context?
So imagine you're constantly being told that you're responsible for your own success, that your worth is tied to how productive you are.
Right.
So any feelings of inadequacy or failure you have, you just internalize them. And it fuels this cycle of self-blame and this pressure to constantly improve.
So we're basically trained to exploit our own suffering
Yeah.
to make ourselves more valuable to the system.
In a way, yes.
Damn, that's kind of a bleak picture.
It is. But the book also says that recognizing that dynamic is the first step towards resisting it.
Okay, so awareness is key. But what else can we do?
Well, it doesn't give any easy answers.
Right.
But it does say that we need to be more critical of the systems that we're operating within. It emphasizes the importance of recognizing the limits of individual responsibility.
So it's about understanding that we're not just like isolated individuals.
Right.
We're all connected.
We're all interconnected and impacted by these larger forces.
Right. Okay, that's a good point. So instead of just blaming ourselves for struggling within a system that's kind of set up to make us struggle,
Exactly.
we can start to actually advocate for change.
You got it.
Okay, I like that. Did the book talk about any other strategies for kind of pushing back against this pressure in the workplace?
Yeah. One thing it highlighted was reclaiming our time and energy.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right, because in a culture obsessed with being busy and productive.
Always on the grind.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
easy to forget about our own well-being.
Totally. So it's about like setting boundaries, prioritizing self-care, and pushing back on that expectation that we need to be on all the time.
Exactly.
But is that even possible?
It's tough, but it's crucial for our mental health.
I mean, I think a lot of us struggle with that.
For sure.
Did the book give us any like practical tips for actually doing this?
It did. One suggestion was building supportive communities and networks.
Oh,
Because in a society that's so individualistic,
right.
it's easy to feel isolated.
Totally.
But connecting with others who share your values and goals,
It's like finding your tribe.
yeah, can help you feel less alone.
Less alone and supported.
Exactly.
Okay, that's encouraging. So did the book have any other practical advice for pushing back on this pressure?
It did, and this one might surprise you.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It highlights the power of language.
Language.
Yeah, remember all those buzzwords we talked about?
Like personal branding and hustle culture and
All of that.
Yeah, we hear it everywhere.
Right. And the book suggests that we need to consciously challenge that language.
So be more mindful of the words we're using
Exactly.
and the messages that they're sending.
Both to ourselves and to others.
Yeah. Okay, I like that. So instead of talking about personal branding, we can focus on like our authentic selves
Right.
and the unique skills we bring to the table.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming our language and using it to express values that are more aligned with our well-being and our sense of purpose.
I love that. Okay, so by shifting our language, we can actually start to create a more humane and sustainable work culture.
That's the idea.
Wow, this is giving me a lot to think about.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everyone. We've been talking about neoliberalism as a management of suffering.
Yeah.
And how this ideology like seeps into our work lives and it impacts our mental health, our self-worth,
It's a lot to unpack.
It's heavy stuff. But, knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm kind of curious to explore some of the bigger picture questions the book raises. Like, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
How do we challenge this ideology? It just seems like it's everywhere.
It's a big question.
It is.
And the book doesn't claim to have all the answers.
Right.
But it gives us a framework for thinking about these issues in a more critical way.
Okay, what kind of framework are we talking about?
Well, one key idea is this concept of a social pact.
A social pact.
Yeah, the book argues that neoliberalism has fundamentally changed this pact, shifting away from a collective sense of responsibility towards this more individualistic model.
So instead of like, we're all in this together, it's like you're on your own.
Exactly. It's like everyone's an island.
Yeah, you're responsible for your own success or failure, like regardless of the circumstances.
Right, and that has big implications for how we view things like social justice and inequality, even the role of government.
Yeah, totally. It's like we're losing that sense of community, that understanding that we need to support each other.
Exactly, and the book argues that this erosion of the social pact is one of the most damaging aspects of neoliberalism.
Because it makes it so much easier to just accept the way things are.
Exactly, even when they're clearly unfair or unsustainable.
Right, and it creates this climate of isolation and competition that's just not good for anyone.
It's not sustainable in the long run.
So if we want to challenge neoliberalism, we need to start by rebuilding that sense of community.
I think that's a great place to start.
But how do we even do that? I mean, this individualistic, market-driven ideology, it just seems so powerful.
It is powerful, but the book reminds us that ideologies aren't set in stone.
Okay.
They're created and maintained by our collective beliefs and actions.
So we actually have the power to change things.
We do. It's about shifting our mindset, seeing ourselves differently, and demanding a different kind of world.
But how? Where do we even begin?
Well, one strategy the book suggests is collective action.
Collective action, so like joining forces with people who share our values.
Exactly, working together to create a more just and equitable world.
So it's like strength in numbers.
Exactly. The book really emphasizes that we're stronger together.
So what does that look like in real life? Are we talking about like protests and demonstrations, or is there more to it than that?
It can be those things, but it can also be much more than that.
Okay.
The book suggests that collective action can take many forms.
Okay, give me some examples.
It could be organizing within our workplaces to demand better conditions. It could be engaging in political activism to advocate for policies that put people first. Or it could even be as simple as supporting organizations that are working to create a more just and sustainable world.
So it's about finding our own way to contribute, using our skills and passions to make a difference.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Okay, that's kind of empowering. It's like we all have a role to play.
We do, and the book emphasizes that finding the strategies that resonate with us and using our strengths to make an impact is key.
This is giving me a lot of hope.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
But I have to be honest, it's also a little overwhelming. Like, where do we even begin to untangle this web of ideology and systems? It's so deeply entrenched.
It's true. It is complex, but the book reminds us that change is possible.
Okay.
One step at a time.
One step at a time.
And it encourages us to start by cultivating critical awareness in our own lives, recognizing how this ideology shapes our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors.
So starting with ourselves.
Exactly. Being more mindful of the choices we make, the messages we internalize.
And then from there, we can start to extend that awareness outward.
Yes. Engaging in conversations with others, sharing our insights, and working together to create something better.
Wow. This has been quite the journey.
It has.
We've explored this complex relationship between neoliberalism and mental suffering. And I think we've all learned a lot about how this ideology shapes our understanding of work success, even our own sense of self.
Yeah, it's been challenging for sure, but also really thought-provoking.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think pretty empowering.
I agree, because while the book highlights the challenges we face, it also offers hope.
Right. It reminds us that we have the power to create a better world.
And that we're not alone in this fight.
So to everyone listening, we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, challenge those assumptions, and find your own ways to contribute to a more just and equitable world.
And remember, you don't have to do it alone.
Right.
Connect with others, support each other, and let's create the change we want to see.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.